Hi everyone, welcome back to the Robertson Media Center at UVA. Today we're going to continue our tutorial on DaVinci Resolve by discussing the basics of text, titles, and effects. Again, this video series is intended for beginners and only covers enough to get started. We're going to start today by introducing two new panels to the editing workspace. As you can see, I'm in the editing workspace down here. The first one is up on the top left corner, right next to the media pool, which you can turn on and off, is the effects library. The effects library we mentioned with audio transitions and video transitions is also where you're going to find things like titles and certain effects. The second panel I'm going to introduce is over on the top right side called the inspector. If you click that, then you can see there's a lot of editable information over here, especially for text and effects. You'll notice as I turn on the inspector, right, it removes one of the preview windows. It's the preview window of your media. The one that's left behind is from your timeline. So we'll start with text. You can see I have some text here with the definition of what a meme is in my preview window. So again, over in the effects library, make sure that's turned on. Under titles, you'll see many different types of titles that are possible. Text is a very basic one. If I brought this in, you can see what that looks like here. Just a very basic title, no additional effects on it. Scroll is used for end titles for the most part, so this is a scroll here at the end as the text kind of scrolls across the screen. Lower thirds are down at the bottom, usually for an interview or something where you have somebody's name and what their title is. And then if you scroll down at the very bottom is subtitles, which you can use for translation or for captioning as well. And then fusion titles. So the other ones are really kind of 2D and very flat. They don't have any animation or anything like that. A lot of these are 3D or have a certain amount of motion to them. So if I were to drag in title center reveal, so you can see what this looks like here, right? Then it has a bit of animation to it, and a lot of that animation you can edit and change. I won't go into these just because I think you should go through and watch them to see what they look like. But those are also available. Today we're mostly going to cover creating text from scratch rather than using these fusion titles, which kind of do a lot of that work for you. So let's begin with the basic text. Drag it in here. Please take note that it is not, does not automatically have a background to it. So if I were to drag it over the top of something else, you can see it's just up on top of the other things. So if you want to add a background, you'll have to do that manually. And I'll show you that as we get through these settings coming down on the inspector. Keep in mind that you can drag the edges to make it shorter or longer, depending on how long you want this title to last. You can also add these video transitions and cross dissolve in or out, for instance. I'll undo that. And then you select your title, and then you turn on the inspector, again, the button up here on the top right, and you'll see rich text. Here you can type in your text, and you can have multiple lines if you would like. Start with one line to demonstrate most kind of opening titles. And then you have all your options underneath as I scroll down. The first one is font family. You can select any number of font families that you have installed. Something popular is Arial, for instance, or if you have Helvetica. Or if you want a serif font, you can choose something like Times New Roman. And then there's an nearly infinite number of fonts that you can choose from online that you can download. One place you can look is a website called dafont.com. And here you can find a lot of user-submitted or created free fonts. Just make sure you pay attention to how you can use them. Some of them have copyrights for things like commercial use. But if this is personal use, you could come in here and look at the different categories up here. Everything from really decorative and fancy ones to really basic, simple sans serifs, for instance, or symbols over here. I'll click on something like, I don't know, retro. And then you can see here's a number of retro influenced fonts. Keep in mind some of them are a little close to a copyrighted font, like this American Captain looks a lot like the Captain America font. But you can come in here and find something that you want to use. So if it's personal use, for instance, this franchise, I could click on and you can find out more information. What it means, personal use, just can't be selling it, using it commercially. And if you want to use it commercially, you can order a license usually from whoever made them. But all you do is you download it and then you can install it. So if I click download, it shows here. If I open up the zip, then I can come in here and install this. So all I did was double click on this TTF, click install font. It'll be different on a PC, but pretty similar. And then I've added it into my fonts. And this one actually has two different fonts in this package, filled and unfilled. And now I have both here in my fonts panel. And then if you return to DaVinci Resolve, you can see under font family, franchise. You may have to save and quit and open it back up if you have installed something. Sometimes it doesn't quite update right away, so you just need to reopen the program. Below that, you will see font face, and here you can see all the different options. With franchise, the one I downloaded only has one. Often, the ones you download from DaFont or from online will only have one face. This one actually has a separate one for franchise filled, which is why there's not a separate face here. But if you go to something like really popular like Helvetica Neue, you can see there are several in here that you could choose from, everything from ultralight to bold to italic, and you can find all of those under font face. Let me return this to bold for a moment. Below that you can see color. I select something different, you can see as it changes the color that I choose. I'm going to return to white for a moment. Size, you can adjust just with this little slider. This is a coarse adjustment, which means that it's adjusting very quickly. If you want a little more fine-tuned adjustment, something that moves a little slower, you can click and grab on the number here and pull. And that can adjust a little more smoothly or slowly until you think it's the right size. And then you can actually undo it. You can say reset right here, which is this button over on the far right side, to reset to what it was originally. And that is any of these over on the far right side to reset. Tracking is the space between letters. So you can really have it kind of crunch in if you would like, or be really stretched out. And reset that. That can go awry pretty quickly, but if you want to make an adjustment there, you can. Line spacing is if you have multiple lines. So if I have two lines here and I click and drag on this, you can see that I can have them spaced however you would like, including overlapping, which could be a cool effect if that's what you're going for. Again, I will hit the reset button. Below that, you will see font style, which includes things like underlines or these kind of lines above or strike through, etc. I'm going to return to a single line here. And font case. If you select all caps, you can see that you can switch it without retyping all of your font or all of your text, and even down to small caps, which is something that I think is kind of fun. You can see the capitalized letter is a larger letter, but they're all capitalized here. I'm going to return to mixed. Mixed just means that it's what I originally typed, or you can just hit this reset button here. Alignment and anchor is really useful. So you can actually have it stay aligned to the center. That's what I have currently as default, which is the center this way and centered this way. So even if I change the size, as you saw earlier, it always stays centered. Super easy, makes it 100% sure that you are going to have a centered, aligned piece of text. If you don't want that, there are other options here, such as kind of these, which kind of align it to the center, but to the left or right side, or the top or the bottom. kind of these lower thirds. I will reset that. I'm going to keep it at center. In most cases, you will find that you have most of your text centered in the frame, unless it's something like a lower third, for instance, where it has someone's name and title, etc., near the bottom, usually the bottom left of the screen. Position, if you don't want it perfectly aligned, you can have it customized completely as you position it however you would like on the X and Y axis. Also hit undo there, and this eventually will be able to animate if you would like. Zoom, won't need to use for text because you should probably use the size to adjust the size of your text. And then rotation, so you can rotate the text here. You can also click and with any of these type in a number. So if you want it to be exactly 9 degrees, you could type it that way. Down here you have a few more options. You got drop shadow, stroke, and then background. With the drop shadow you can choose a color. Let me place it over something that's a little easier to see. Here we go. I can choose a color. Let's say I want black, and then I can choose an offset. So if I move this, the x-axis and the y-axis, I can create a drop shadow like so, and then adjust the opacity. So if I want it just a little bit transparent, I can drop this down to 29%. I can also blur it. You can also, again, reset any of these over here, or reset all of the drop shadow to the original, which I'll click and show you there. And then I can actually turn off the drop shadow if I don't want it. Stroke, you need to increase size to actually see it, and you can see there's an outline around your text in whatever color you have chosen. So if you want it to get kind of crazy, we can do kind of a pink outline or something like that. I'm going to return it to black. And then you can adjust how thick it is with the size slider. And again, I can leave that on. If, for instance, it's really useful if you have a background that has both light and dark areas, and where it can interfere with if the text is white, or it can interfere if the text is black and you can't see both sides. Adding an outline can really kind of set that apart from the background. The background is where I said earlier that you may want something. So if I didn't want to actually see anything in the background, this is where you can set your background color. So if I choose something, let's say I want like a dark gray, and I click OK, then all I have to do is actually adjust the height, and you can start seeing this background. So I can make that fill the whole frame with height and width. And then you can, for instance, adjust the opacity. So here I could adjust it all the way up, and then you can see I have a gray, full gray background without actually adding anything into the timeline. So you can see if I changed it to this, right, what kind of color I could have in the background. And I'll click OK. I'm going to return this to black. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity so it's somewhat transparent. So this is a way you can kind of get a picture in the background, but kind of have it kind of grayed out, something like that. Or if you want like a, kind of a green filter on something or something, so you can see the YouTube in the background, but kind of have it a little bit of green haze around it, for instance, you could do something like that with the background. You can also have it not fill the entire space. If I reduce the width down to just my text and I reduce the height down, you can see I can create kind of a box around it. And this one already has a quarter radius, but you can turn that off or make it much more pronounced, as pronounced as you would like, and reduce it down. Let's see, something like that looks kind of nice in terms of the text. You can also adjust where it is centered. So if you want, for instance, like a little more space below or something like that, you can adjust the center to be exactly as you would like. You can also reset it here. And then opacity, as we talked about. So you can adjust that there. And now we move back over to the effects library. Again, if you don't have it open, you can select it up here in the top left. Then there's a little section of effects over here, open effects. And you can see there are many here that we're not going to talk about, very many of them at all. But these are things that you can add to a clip. So something you'll use probably more than anything else would be something like blur. So if I go back to this image, for instance, and I drag a box blur onto it, then I can blur out an image over here. So if you click up on your inspector, like we had open when we were working on text, and you go over to open effects, you can actually adjust these settings. You can adjust horizontally and vertically, right? Uncheck this, you can do it separately. So you could have kind of a vertical blur or a horizontal blur, right? If you recheck it, then they will stay together. So that's a box blur, and if you hit this little trash button, you can actually delete it, or this here will reset it to the original settings. I'm going to hit the trash button. There are other types of blurs. You can play with those if you would like to. There are some specialized things like inverting color. So if I do that one, it'll invert all of your colors. And again, you can go to Open Effects over here and make different selections, including blending this together with the original image. I'm going to hit the little trash button to get rid of that. And then there are, you know, some lens flares and glows and things like that you can play around with if you would like to. A little more advanced than we will get to in this particular tutorial. Sharpen could be helpful. It's the opposite of blur if you need to sharpen an image. So those are the very, very basic effects filters that you can drop onto a clip. Actually not quite as useful, and there's an entire workspace for more advanced effects called Fusion that we'll get to in a different video. The next thing we're going to look at actually is just all the effects that are available inside of the inspector window. So if you click on, let's click on our Rickroll again here, and you come up to your inspector. Again, you can turn it on over here in the top right. You will see in the video section a very similar set of effects that you saw when you're looking at the text. And this, you can actually adjust your zoom, position, rotation angle, etc. So if you wanted to zoom in or out on your footage, you can do that. And you can also reset it over here. I'm going to zoom in so I don't have the black boxes on the outside, for instance. I can do that there. If you want it to zoom separately from the X and Y axis, you can uncheck this little link button, and then you could have it stretch. I'm going to undo that. Position is where it's positioned in the frame, so you can drag that left and right, up and down. So if you want it to be really small and then over in this corner, you can do that in this inspector window, for instance. Undo both of those. Rotation angle rotates it. Right, see if you wanted it to be at slightly an angle and a little smaller, right? Have kind of stylistic effect as this is playing through. You could do that there. I'm going to reset all of those again. Don't worry about anchor point yet. That won't be as useful until you get to something like animation. Pitch, if you need it to shift this way or that way, which again could be a cool effect if you want it to be kind of small, at an angle, right? And then you could see what that looks like. Yaw is left and right, kind of stretching outward on one side and squeezing the other down, versus pitch, which is kind of up and down. If you want to flip an image, you select it, and then there's these flip horizontal options. So you kind of flip the image backwards or up and down, and you can reset those here with that button. Up above that, we'll return to Composite. This is really useful for kind of superimposition or other types of combining images together. So if I put this up on top of the Rickroll here, then I drop down the opacity. As you drag this, it becomes transparent. Right, the top one over the other one. If I bring that to 100, then you can also go to composite mode. This is different algorithms to mix the two together, so it can be pretty weird if you do something like multiply, right, or difference. Right, this is going to find the difference between the images and kind of mix them two together based on a set of factors, exclusion or screen. But many of them, just go through and try them out. This is a good way to get something really kind of crazy or really interesting as images mixed together. So if I were, for instance, to create multiple copies by holding Option of this Rickroll, and I layered them on top of each other, and then I, for instance, moved them off sync a little bit and dropped in something like difference. You can see you immediately get something really interesting in terms of the compositing them together. Down below that is something maybe a little bit more traditional, is the dynamic zoom. If I turn this on and double click, you can actually set how you want something called Ken Burns. It's an effect where you're slightly zooming in or out on an image, and this automatically does that for you. So if you press play, you can see dynamic zoom kind of did a nice ease in and out to zoom in. So you can use these different options, and that's a way to have an image kind of zoom in a little bit. It's just a nice dynamic way of presenting a still image. If I double click on cropping, you can actually crop an image based on the left side, the right side, right? So if I move this up on top of the Rickroll again, you can see this a little bit better. Right? You could do a split screen this way, for instance, right? In half. You can also soften that edge, or crop out just a couple corners. The only other one of these that I'm going to cover is retime and scaling, and there's only one option that I think you really could use. This scaling option here allows you to choose automatic settings based on the size of the image. So you can have it fit or fill or stretch, for instance. So if I were to come up here and reset my zoom, you can see this better. I can crop, which is just going to crop it to the size that it came in as. Fit is going to try and fit it in terms of the widest or tallest area. Fill is going to try to fill the entire frame with it. And stretch is going to stretch it so it fills, which is very bad in most situations because it's going to stretch those pixels and look kind of awful. So if I go to fill, then you can see it automatically kind of fit this image in there, even though it originally looked like that. You can do all of that with the options up above. This is just an automatic way of kind of doing this. If you have a lot of images that are kind of this shape or something and you want to fill them all, it's easy to do that here in the retime and scaling section. Just want to point out, if you have some lens correction or stabilization you need to do if there's too much movement, you can do that here. I'm not going to cover that in this video. You can look that up separately. One last quick, very easy effect that you can do on your clips is to change their speed, so if slow motion or speed them up. If you come down here, so for instance, I have my Rickroll right here. If I right click on it and I say change clip speed, and I select this, then I can actually adjust what percentage it is. So 50%, of course, would be slower. 200% would be a lot faster. Then you can also, select choose by duration. So if you have a specific amount of time that you need to fill, for instance, you can do that here. You can either check or uncheck pitch correction, right? So when you're speeding up or slowing down, it'll be lower or higher. So you can try to have it correct so that the pitch is intact. And then you can also do things like freeze frame, or this one right here is reverse speed. So if you want it to go backwards, you can check that. So if it's at 200% and reversed, I click change, we can watch how that changed the clip. So it's twice as fast and in reverse. Undo to change that. So again, right click, go to change clip speed, and you have all those options here. So that's it for basic text and effects. Stick with us. Coming up next, we have more advanced effects, audio, and we'll get into some color correction.